Maybe Professor Panigrahi, would you want to add something to it?
I think you are absolutely correct as far as the discussion flowing through, and I think one of the another part where India ASEAN can be looking towards is yes, as we do have the free trade agreement. Also at the same time, ASEAN, if we am correct, ASEAN also plays because of its centrality. It plays a wonderful role for such as. Let's take the example of Indonesia. The bullet train is built by the Chinese. They call it whoosh, and the metro system or the subway system is built by the Japanese. So all this kinds like giving one sort of major project to Chinese, another project to Asia, to Japan, and Indonesia's fighter jet programs is going towards more leaning towards Korea, or more culturally they're leaning more towards India, or strategically leaning more towards US. So that's kind of one of the great example to see how countries are playing centrality or trying to play to be a neutral partner rather than being seen as that a country is being sided to others. But when this case fails, when it comes to the Philippines or other countries in the region, that also makes sense because of its own strategic challenges that the Philippines is facing from Chinese on the water side, and all the threat mongering that has been happening. So this uh, limited to that. Coming back to the India and the trade partnership, I think one other way that India and ASEAN can cooperate, and especially with the ASEAN's exports, or would be the IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which kind of has been stalled right now due to the unrest in the Middle East, which is where the countries in ASEAN can see India as one of the base for their exports as well. And also at the same time, when it comes to, as you, Professor Pathak has rightly mentioned, that countries are moving out of China and let's say, focusing more on Vietnam. And so this is where ASEAN can also, or it is to a certain extent, primarily the Vietnamese are playing a major role where they, due to a almost similar cultural, almost culture, and so with Taiwan, the Taiwanese business community has been moving in large numbers to Vietnam and moving the production from China to Vietnam. This and also do it have Vietnam also have a large industrial base of Korean and Japanese companies. So that itself kind of plays a larger context of a growing trade ties. But yes, trade barriers looms, and the deepening of uh, non-tariff barriers has to be increased between the all the countries, so that a larger benefit can be reached out to the people on living in here. Thank you.
Yeah, Drishti, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. Thank you once again to both of our esteemed speakers for sharing such in depth and thought provoking perspectives. Now, we'll move towards our last segment, that is the cultural and diplomatic engagement, which plays a pivotal role in building long term regional partnership. My first question is, how does ASEAN maintain diplomatic balance among powerful stakeholders like China, India, and Northeast Asian countries? Over to you.
Thank you. Again, very interesting question. Managing a diplomatic balance is a tough call for any country. And look, ASEAN, as great as a grouping that it is, it also has its own perspectives. Individual countries have their own perspectives towards the US or towards China and so on. So, but that being said, ASEAN has done a brilliant job of not letting any of these perspectives towards other countries spill over into direct disputes between ASEAN countries per se. There are ASEAN countries and they have their own disputes, and they have their own boundary related disputes, migration related disputes, and so on. But external factors, so far, I don't see them having created a very big dent in ASEAN solidarity. Now, ASEAN maintains diplomatic balance among powerful stakeholders like China, India, and other Northeast Asian countries like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan through a mix of neutrality, sometimes multilateralism, and sometimes pragmatic engagement. Just to give you some example, now ASEAN positions itself as a neutral convener. It emphasizes ASEAN centrality in frameworks such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, East Asia Summit, ASEAN Plus 3. This ensures that no single power dominates the agenda. Just to give you an idea as to how this is applied. On China, ASEAN engages China through the ASEAN China Free Trade Area and dialogue on the South China Code of Conduct while avoiding explicit alignment against Beijing. What does it do with India? ASEAN strengthens ties via the ASEAN India FTA, India's Act East policy. It welcomes India's Indo Pacific vision without endorsing its anti China undertones. Now let's look at Northeast Asia, other countries of Northeast Asia, Japan and South Korea. They are engaged by ASEAN through the APT and bilateral partnerships, while Taiwan's involvement is more or less limited to economic ties so as to avoid provoking China. So this is the very tricky balancing, and this is how it practices that sort of neutrality. And for ASEAN, neutrality has worked. It preserves ASEAN's autonomy. It prevents entrapment in great power rivalries. Let's look at some multilateral platform for dialogue. Now, ASEAN also hosts inclusive forums to facilitate dialogue because when there are conflicts, you also need dialogue, right? So that there can be a diffusion of tension, so that there can be an aim at fostering cooperation. These sorts of platforms bring together India, China, Japan, South Korea together to discuss security, to discuss economic issues, ensuring that ASEAN gets to set the agenda. There's ASEAN Plus 3, right? It focuses on economic integration with China, Japan, and South Korea that balances their influence through consensus based decisions. There's the ASEAN India Summit. So, what happens is that multilateralism ends up diluting the bilateral tensions. Again, ASEAN also practices economic pragmatism. It leverages its economic partnerships to maintain equidistance, prioritizing trade, prioritizing investment over any sort of geopolitical alignment. Um, Despite the fact that India has exited the RCEP, ASEAN has been strengthening its ties with India. It has been pushing for the ASEAN India FTA as well as for connectivity projects like the trilateral highway. That's a very pragmatic move, right? You, as a country, you can't, or as a grouping of countries, you can't sit and just feel bad that India exited the RCEP. Oh, I'm just really heartbroken. So I think that's a smart move. Countries have to do things like that. Um, with respect to Taiwan, as I said earlier, also, ASEAN has been leveraging Taiwan's new southbound policy. There's been $100 billion of trade in 2023, and these ties are pursued discreetly so as to avoid further ire or anger from the PRC. What the ASEAN also does is that it focuses on consensus based decision making. If you look at South China Sea, ASEAN avoids a collective confrontation with China, allowing members like Philippines or the Vietnam to pursue their own bilateral strategies while maintaining the code of conduct talks. So I think that's a smart move, and it's a smart way of proceeding with development. Just to mention the last bit, soft power and non-alignment, ASEAN has been promoting a lot of cultural exchange, education, people to people ties. With China, in the realm of cultural diplomacy, there's been the ASEAN China Year of Cultural Exchange. With India, there are initiatives like the Nalanda University, cultural festivals. All of this also push the soft power linkage. With Japan, with South Korea, there are linkages through K pop, J pop, educational exchanges, Japan's JET program. All of this also enhance the goodwill. And then there are Taiwan scholarships, of course, which very quietly boost the ties. So the outcome of all of this is that soft power from ASEAN has been fostering positive relations without committing the ASEAN to any particular power or any strategic dynamic per se.
Professor Panigrahi, would you like to add something?
Yes, of course. So again, so let me just if you see the how ASEAN interacts with this major powers in the region. It's primarily using unilateralism rather than a multilateralism forum. As we can see, there has been, let's say, ASEAN India Forum, ASEAN US Forum, ASEAN China, ASEAN Japan, and so on. So these are the major ways which they had did, as Pathak also mentioned, is about how they maintain the neutrality. But at the same time, when it comes to the strategic challenges, they do have their own concerns, and they don't fall in the same page. Let's say we have seen when ASEAN was summit was held in Cambodia, which is seemed as more like a pro-leaning Chinese government in Cambodia. They voted to name China in terms of the joint statement when it comes to the South China Sea aggressiveness and so on and so forth. Right. So there are some cracks in the neutrality, but at the same time, largely it has stayed intact so far, and they do play a significant role. Another major part why how they maintain neutrality is also, which is also related to, as I mentioned before, is about track 1.5, and two is where they try to engage the diaspora on each other's countries, which helps in terms of putting the um, views forward to the leaders, or the leaders views to the each other's countries leaders. So that brings a certain stance of neutrality, and in terms of how ASEAN engage into this to this region. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those were excellent observations. I really wanted to ask you about soft power, but I think you've already mentioned it in the wake of K-pop and J-pop, and the initiatives in relation to Nalanda University. I am personally really interested in the idea of soft power. I mean, how US sort of harnessed it to project America as this harbinger of democracy and justice when the reality can be completely different. I mean, this idea has always sort of intrigued me, and I wanted to ask about cultural diplomacy and soft power, but I think Professor Pathak has already talked about J-pop and K-pop and the other initiative. Professor Panigrahi, would you like to talk about something in relation to soft power and cultural diplomacy? Yeah.
Yes. As you see, as you know, like there are a huge Indian diaspora in ASEAN countries, and so do the Chinese diaspora in ASEAN countries. And so that helps in more time in terms of connectivity. I personally am more interested about Cambodia's Angkor Wat temple, because it is primarily designed from a temple which very popular, or a kind of a one of the must place visit for the people who follow Hindu religion from my state. So how this connectivity has happened over the centuries, and this also helps in terms of let's say putting forward Indian culture to create a positivity of Indians in the region, and also at the same time, this also assisted and has been assisting India and ASEAN ties in terms of, let's say, I did mention about tsunami and the non-traditional security challenges. That's where the Indian the rescue workers did help, or the Navy, they have a regular port calls to such countries to have a more a bilateral engagement in terms of to help each other. But at the same time, the East Asian countries, like the new southbound countries, policy of Taiwan, they did have they also tried to not to put all the eggs in one basket. They did try to reach out to more Southeast Asian countries, and they do have a visa-free policy, as I did mention, with Thailand and Philippines. That has helped in terms of growing to move away from only like over dependency of each individual countries on China in terms of tourism, in terms of let's say TV soap operas and so to move to this different places. And also in Taiwan, because of this larger migrant worker community, there are a lot of innovative ideas and like TV dramas which highlights the challenges of such migrant workers, or the human rights issues that people face, ASEAN members, citizens face in Taiwan, comes out in place. And so do the most popular one is obviously the K-pop. It's everywhere, and it's so do in India. This helps in kind of a bridge the ties between all the countries and in the region and in the Indo-Pacific as such, you say. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really like the point where you talked about how, like, also in these soap operas, migrant workers and their issues are sort of highlighted. I mean, it sort of reminded me of like the Squid Game, the Netflix popular series where there's a Pakistani character and he's a migrant worker and he's there. So, I mean, sort of reflects the pluralism and the cultural syncretism that's present. And I was just talking to one of my friend a few months before, she's from Vietnam, and she was like, how Balika Vatu is really popular in Vietnam. And that sort of shocked me, and I was like, "Oh, really?" And yeah, but that sort of shows a pluralism and the increasing globalized world that we are living in. Dushri, do you want to conclude?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Uh, that was very beautifully emphasized on how non-traditional diplomacy and people-to-people engagement can shape long-term regional harmony. Thank you once again to both of our esteemed speakers for sharing such in-depth and thought-provoking perspectives across all the three themes which we covered today, be it strategic and security interest, economic and trade cooperation, and cultural and diplomatic engagements. Your insights today have helped us better understand ASEAN's evolving role in Indo Pacific, its complex partnership with Northeast Asia and India, and the importance of youth driven diplomacy and collaborations. This discussion has truly enriched our understanding of how regional cooperations can be built not only through policies and trade, but also through dialogue, cultural connection, and shared vision. Now, I would call Dr. Janvi Anand to take forward a further event.
Hello, thank you so much, Trusty. I hope I'm audible and my voice is very clear.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And I must say, what a phenomenal panel discussion we just witnessed. And someone who's coming from medical background and staying in one of the Asian country, Thailand, and doing my research. I must say some of the topic were new, but still fascinating. I just learned so much about it. And I must say the panel is fabulous. And let's take a moment to appreciate the powerful voices and diverse perspectives that have just echoes through this space and I witnessed in a form of discussion. And thank you so much once again. And I would like to say each speaker has brought forward not only valuable insight, but also a deep sense of purpose, vision, and lived experience that has truly added depth in today's session. So now I have to say that it's time for us to open the conversation to you. And you, I want to say, is our engaging and curious participant. And this is your opportunity to interact directly with our esteemed panelists. So, to seek clarity, bring forward your idea, curiosity, or any question you have, please send your question personally to me in the chat box. So, you have to send the question directly to me and to whom you want to ask to, so to whom you are referring to, and I will select and voice few of question to our esteemed speaker to respond to it live. Okay, I can see. Uh, okay, there is some question. So one is, I don't know, it's directly to me, but there is a one question in chat box is like from Kapil Vyas, which is the recent question, and he wanted to share that what are your views on the recent news of no progress has been made on trade and agreement between India ASEAN despite various meetings so far? So there is no specific reference, and I don't know but who he is referring to, but I would love to hear from both of our esteemed speakers their opinion.
Okay, maybe I shall go first, and maybe Professor Panigrahi can join in. So, yeah, there's been a lot of reportage, and there's been a lot of anguish, and the Indian industry has been increasingly frustrated with the extremely slow progress in the renegotiation of the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. There have been 9 rounds of talks since November 2019, and the fundamental concerns about the lopsided nature of the original deal, they've not really reached a solution so far. The pace of negotiations is very slow. It was supposed to conclude by 2025, and that is what has amplified industry anguish over what many are considering an unfavorable trade agreement. But that being said, this is not the first trade agreement which has been slow. I remember many years ago, we had a bilateral with Malaysia, India Malaysia FTA, and we used to get a lot of palm oil imports. and it was being detrimental for the health, or just for the economy in general as well, there were certain renegotiations, and it took time, but it did yield in positive results. Things take time, and things like this, look, each side will not be willing to give in very easily. Things take time. It's great that we are living in the information age, which is why we keep getting bombarded with this sort of a news. And because we're living in the internet age, when it gets amplified so much, it seems like it's a task which will never really get done. But trust me, there have been several FTAs which have been negotiated in the past. Trade with ASEAN, India's trade with ASEAN, or ASEAN's trade with India have been helpful. That being, that's, I think that's the main reason why, as to why both the sides have not called off the agreements. There are problems. But I think if we would have really thought it's not going to go any forward, we would have just called it off. ASEAN would have called it off. But the fact is, we understand things will be slow, you know. Plus, ASEAN is not just one country. Different countries have different sorts of economic strengths. What Singapore has is not what Thailand would have, or what Thailand has would not be something which Cambodia has, right? So India also has to identify, because it's going to be a long drawn task. It affects the Indian economy. India is trying to unleash the prowess of the Make in India. So it's going to take time, but that doesn't mean that we give up. So difficult times, but let's keep pushing for it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Janvi, and for the question as well. As just mentioned, I think, fortunately, unfortunately, during such trade agreements, we have to realize that we all are democratic countries, and most of us, both in ASEAN and in India, as such. And given the fact that there are 10 countries negotiating with one, or like 10 countries' national interest or the trade economic interest comes, and it does takes time, and it's challenging, it's not easy to coordinate, because what may be good for let's say Indonesia, maybe it may not be good for, say, like Philippines or Malaysia. So, and also there is a significant competition for palm oil exports between Indonesia and Malaysia to India. So all given that said, and also as in throughout our earlier discussions, we did mention about whenever India has signed FTA with any country or a group, it has been on its loss. So the Indian policymakers, I'm sure they are also trying to find ways where they can have a more open, engaging agreement where it won't be at a significant loss as it has been in the past with the other FTAs. I think that's one of the reasons why the FTAs has not been done.
Thank you so much for such a comprehensive and thoughtful response. And I really like the insight that you mentioned that each country have their own values and their own cultural belief, and also the many different determinants. So whenever we're talking about, like, I'm just saying in a perspective of like a policy maker, it's so difficult. One thing will not work for every country, because there is multiple country in ASEAN, developing, developed, and underdeveloped country. So I really appreciate the way that you portrayed. So the next question here is, I'm taking it from the top, is like Mr. Pankaj Kumar, and his question is about multilateralism or bilateral relationship helps India in relation with ASEAN. So again, it's not referred to anyone. So please, I hope both of you can answer on this one.
Professor, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. So, diplomacy or negotiations is such a thing that it can never be an either or. It's always a mix of both. Nowadays there's not just bilateral deals, it's not just multilateral deals, it's also minilaterals, it's also plurilaterals, right? So it's a mix and match. Whichever format works out the best is something that any country would go for. So, if the partnership can be taken forward in an India ASEAN format, both the parties would be agreeing to it. But for example, right now we see that okay, India ASEAN FTA is at certain loggerheads, and there are certain issues. what would India do? Or say, what would any particular country of ASEAN do? It can also choose a bilateral agreement, right? When, say, just to give you an example and moving a bit away from trade and economics, when, say, Philippines wanted to buy BrahMos from India, it didn't go through the grouping, ASEAN grouping, because not everyone would be interested. It could be done bilaterally because Philippines need is different from, say, I don't know, Cambodia or Laos or Myanmar. So bilaterals work, multilaterals also work, plurilaterals also work. So if you try and study the history as to how the whole epoch of international relations has evolved. Earlier, it might have been just bilateral, country to country or kingdom to kingdom sort of negotiations. Then it might have expanded to three. But after Second World War, given the fact that the United Nations emerged and replaced the League of Nations, there was one envisaged big grouping, which the world thought is more of a universal grouping. It's the multilateral thing. But we understood that even that the UN doesn't really work. So UN can decide on security related things. But what happens to trade? What happens to finance? Let's think of WTO, right? More and more organizations came up. But then that didn't mean that countries were not negotiating bilaterally anymore. Now, this world that we are living in right now, a lot of things don't even happen at the multilateral level. Countries would prefer to do it bilaterally. If it's not happening bilaterally as well, maybe regional grouping. So the formats have changed, but I think the focus still remains that let's find arenas how to cooperate. Let's try and figure out how to not get into conflicts, because conflicts don't lead us anywhere. We are living through 2025 is the year of conflicts, and I don't think in my entire lifetime I've seen so many conflicts happening together all at the same time. But that's the beauty of IR. Like, that's the beauty of diplomacy. We still think about leveraging discussions, maybe bilaterally, maybe regional grouping wise, maybe multilaterally, maybe using plurilaterally. So it always has to be a mix and match of all of these things.
Yeah, I think I don't have any comments. I think Professor Pathak beautifully said it all. Thank you. Can move on to the next.
Yeah, thank you so much, the both the speaker, and I just love how you explain it in depth and also giving that real world example and perspective. I think so. Our participant got their answer. So let's move forward with the next question, and it's from Manas Meshra, and he said that it's clear that the ASEAN as an entity engages balances between USA and China. However, given the India's geopolitical standing, it needs to engage ASEAN countries bilaterally, and yes, it need to do so at an increased pace. So this is like kind of he just shared his opinion, but what's your thought about it?
What's the question? I know, like, he's got an opinion, but what's the question?
I think so. This is just based on like following that question. Is like, is it like true that it's clear that ASEAN as an entity engages balance between US and China, but however, given the India's geopolitical standing, it still needs to engage ASEAN countries bilaterally, and yes, as you just mentioned about multilateralism, bilateralism as well. So, and yes, it needs to do so at an increased pace.
So I think India has been increasing the pace. If you just take a look, even at the sorts of engagements which have happened between India and ASEAN in the last 3 years, I think we've had visits of heads of state or foreign ministers or foreign secretaries from all ASEAN countries, either to India or from India to these ASEAN countries, minus Myanmar, given the fact that Myanmar is facing certain political issues and military turmoil. That's not happened. But even with Myanmar, last year there was an academic exchange. We understand that we cannot really negotiate with a particular leadership because we don't even know clearly as to who could we engage with really, who is calling the shots in the country. Till Myanmar or the people from Myanmar cannot figure that out, it's difficult for an external partner. But that being said, we're still keeping the engagement alive, which is why we still had an engagement. We had a delegation over from Myanmar at the Indian Council of World Affairs, and we had discussions. So it's India has been constantly engaging. India has never let go of the fact that ASEAN has historical, cultural, now we talk about trade, finance, all of these ties, but India has kept the ties going. There are problems, there will always be problems. That's how human life is. Countries are also byproducts of human lives only. So we've never let that engagement go.
Professor Panigrahi, you want to add something?
No, no, I think.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions upcoming. I'm so excited to go through each and everything. And sorry if I'm missing out on something. It's coming on a speed of light, actually. So I'm trying to take the prior question first because they have asked it first. So the next is from Jimmy A. Then he said he want this question to answer specifically. Like, how does ASEAN maintain neutrality when facing pressure from major powers like China and US? And what lesson can smaller countries learn from that balancing act?
The balancing act is, I think, a very difficult balancing act. South Korea or South Koreans also often navigate between this US China rivalry because, look, just to give you an example for South Korea, the Seventh Fleet is there. They are responsible. The US's Seventh Fleet is there, and they're responsible for the security. That being said, Korea is completely reliant on China for trade, for economics, for tourism, all sorts of things. So, either of these two big powers can arm twist Korea into following what they want. So, I think the best strategy is never to put eggs in one basket. This is what, I know. Let's look at Singapore. I think Singapore has been really smart in this. It's navigated this challenge very smartly. It is a financial powerhouse, and it is in ASEAN, right? Um, Unfortunately, some other countries haven't been able to withstand China's charm offensive. That being said, a lot of countries in ASEAN are also treaty alliance partners with the US. Relying on any particular country is equal to putting your eggs in one basket. Countries are such that there are no morals in international relations. There are no permanent friends or foes. Unlike human families, no one really cares. For every country, its own national interest comes first, right? So I think smaller countries, be it in Africa, be it in Latin America, be it in Asia, in fact, even India for that matter, we don't place our eggs in one basket because we never know how the world is going to turn around. No one had envisaged that there's going to be a Donald Trump slapping tariffs left, right, and center on not just countries which are seen as being antagonistic to the US, countries like China, but also slapping tariffs on countries like Japan, on South Korea, on India, partners and allies and friends. That's how international politics is. You can never place your eggs in one basket. Always diversify. And if you have a region with which you can trade and increase your prosperity, use it. India doesn't have that region. We live in a very hostile region. At best, our neighbors benefit from India's economic might, economic prowess. India still tries to engage, but we are not endowed with that sort of a benefit which ASEAN countries have. What is India's stance is that we don't want to place eggs in one basket. So we will leverage Russia, we will leverage the US. China is difficult, so in limited ways wherever it's possible, but it's one should never place its egg in one basket because then you get arm twisted. You know, any country, any region, any grouping, any person will always leverage the fact that you're completely reliant for your existence on that particular entity. So I think all countries should understand this and avoid this.
Professor Panigrahi, would you
Okay.
like to add?
Sure. On this, I think the balancing act, as just discussed, we just discussed about that. How I think we took the example of Indonesia, right? Where the bullet train of Indonesia is sponsored by the primarily by the loan of Chinese. The metro in Jakarta is by the Japanese, but the fighter planes are coming from Korea. I think this is how countries are trying to have trying to have balancing act, but as a group, ASEAN did do try to make its best of not to make the region or the geographical and region not to be a base for other countries to play their games. Like in 1997, the Chinese came out with early harvest policy and assisted Thailand and Philippines in the economic recovery. and that led to a larger economic uh, partnership. That actually that stirred the relationship of China into ASEAN. So that's something that is the countries are trying to. Some of the other, let's say, if I speak more on higher theories, countries are more doing bandwagoning and also to certain extent to hedging, if we kind of use this concept rather than balancing. But as a group, they may be balancing, but as an individual country, they're primarily bandwagoning or hedging to a certain extent when it comes to the major powers in the region.
Yes, I do agree. And the way that Professor Pathak mentioned that there is no permanent friends and foes. And when you mentioned about USA, the one thing spark in my mind is about like no one expected the USA to support Russia. And this is what we learn here when we are creating the policy as well. When governments changes, ideology changes, and when ideology changes, a whole policy changes. So I think so you need to keep in mind whenever we are talking about this friend and foe type of relationship. So let's move forward to the next question. It's from Shreya, and she asked like, with reference to India ASEAN FTA, does ASEAN negotiate with India as a team? Oh, there is a three question actually in one question. One is with reference to India ASEAN FTA, does ASEAN negotiate with India as a team? One question. I'm not sure if ASEAN is a custom union. How do we navigate that? The second question. And how do we get all ASEAN nations on the same page as far as our economic interests are concerned?
So, ASEAN negotiates FTAs with other countries, including with India as a group. And even when, the ASEAN India FTA was first signed in 2009, it came into force in 2010. ASEAN did it as a group. Now, ASEAN functions as a single entity when it's negotiating FTAs, meaning individual member states do not negotiate separately with India when it's related to the bloc per se. So, and what the attempt is that this FTA from ASEAN side, it is attempted to make it a comprehensive trade agreement which can aim to reduce or eliminate tariffs and barriers between India and ASEAN members. So it does it as a grouping. What was the second part of the question? I am forgetting it.
It's that she's not sure if ASEAN is a custom union and how do we navigate that?
Um, ASEAN is ASEAN is not a custom union per se, but it's a grouping, right? Like say when the India EU FTA is being negotiated, it's not like Poland will come separately and negotiate. It's not a custom grouping. I think you're confusing, say, something which happens in day to day human lives with a country per se, or group of countries. So it does it as a grouping. It's not a human. So
And the last part was how do we get all ASEAN nation on the same page as far as our economic interests are concerned?
that's a very difficult, and it's an uphill task. But I think if we can, even when we are talking either to the ASEAN per se, when we are having trade negotiations, if we can discuss what are the strengths of the Indian economy. Just to give you an example, this is something which comes from the India EU FTA, and something in which the Germans are particularly interested. Given that climate change is a real problem, it's a real concern. Um, you know, uh, Most countries, minus the US right now, have tried to create, say, electronic vehicles, for example, or other such products which will reduce the impacts of pollution, right? So there are a lot of these new products which are coming up, right? We're now increasingly talking about how we need to shift to safe usage of nuclear energy as opposed to combustion of coal and so on, right? In this context, something called green hydrogen is very important, right? Now, even in our budget, our latest budget, India has allocated a humongous amount for green energy. And we are trying to create solar panels and those sorts of things. This is this is a new arena. This is an emergent arena. It's not completely emerged, it's going to emerge. But India has a few strengths. Our investments in green hydrogen per se are better than what China is doing. So if we can sell this idea to maybe the Germans, to maybe the Europeans, or even to ASEAN countries, because even ASEAN is concerned about pollution, about climate change, and so on. This is a newer realm where we can cooperate, where we can collaborate. India can decide to either go and talk to ASEAN per se about it, or if India thinks it would be better, then maybe Piyush Goyal ji or anyone from the from the Commerce Industry Ministry could go and speak even to individual countries, countries which would be more, say, which would be more interested in combating climate change, right? Again, different countries have different appetites in combating climate change. Just to give you an example, say the ways in which probably India thinks about climate change would not be how, say, maybe Pakistan thinks about it. Let's forget Pakistan completely. Or maybe say, I don't think that would be the sort of way in which Afghanistan would think of it. Or maybe Bangladesh thinks a bit more about climate change. Maybe India does not. There's always a difference. Gauging that is the work of the people, our ministers, our diplomats. Where is the appetite? Understanding that and then doing the negotiation. So I know it went into a long story, but I hope this helps.
Uh, Professor Panigrahi,
I
if you
think I
want
can
to.
check go for the next question. I think it's always we won't have enough time to respond to each question.
Yeah, sure. So, Professor, you can start on this question. There is one question about considering the Indo-China relation and active growth of other ally Asian nations. What kind of stage are we dreaming, focusing on both power and trade aspects, and how will it change the image of Indo-Asiatic region in front of Pacific Bloc? It's from Tushar Kumar Jha.
Uh, Sorry, I'm not able to understand the question under what context. I am seeing reading the question. I'm sorry, Tushar, I'm not able to understand your question. Uh, When it comes to the region and focusing on both how we can manage university. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, I found the question, but I don't understand. How
And,
will it change the image of Indo-Asiatic? There's no Indo-Asiatic region in
okay.
front of the Pacific bloc. What is the Pacific bloc?
Sorry,
I think so we
Tushar.
can move with next
Maybe let's
question.
take another question. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, okay, so this is how India leverage Singapore to enhance its relation with ASEAN.
I think
Maybe
it's,
Professor Panigrahi, you can take because I've been taking all the questions from a very long time.
Yeah.
I think, okay, this question was put forward to you actually. But
Okay, to me.
yes, if unless you want to.
Okay.
No. Okay.
I can go ahead. See, as I mentioned, Singapore is a financial and tech hub, so there are a lot of similarities. Given the fact that we have programs like Digital India and so on, maybe we can actually leverage some of these. Again, these are emergent ties. Maybe we can look at that. Um, a lot of chatter is going on, and Singaporeans have been talking about how India could open up its economy, right? So we need to leverage and understand how do we leverage certain of these segments, right? Uh, with with between India and Singapore, we have a successful comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. Singapore is India's largest leading source of foreign direct investment. There are lots of firms playing an active role. Uh, what we can do is look at the segments which have pushed the India Singapore relationship forward, right? And maybe we can either take off from that or explore certain complementarities, maybe in fintech. It's an arena which is still evolving in India, but that's an arena which has already evolved to a very high extent in Singapore. Could we have collaborations between certain companies which actually work in this segments? I think that could be one arena. Since I mentioned the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, what we can try to do is streamline certain trade processes. Again, we have non tariff barriers between India and Singapore as well. We can think of expanding market access for Indian goods. Again, things like pharmaceuticals, or agricultural products. Um, Maybe India can think of encouraging further Singaporean investment into India's infrastructure. Indian infrastructure has been booming in the last few years. We can maybe also think about smart cities. We can maybe think about digital economies. Singapore has an expertise in urban planning or in logistics. Some of this can support projects like maybe the Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, maybe the Gift City, and so on. So there is a complementarity there. What can also be envisaged is maybe again thinking from the top of my head, maybe India and Singapore can start thinking about promoting Indian startups or small and medium enterprises to tap into Singapore's role as a financial and innovation hub. Um, Maybe we can have joint R&D in emerging areas like quantum computing, cybersecurity, maybe build up on the initiatives like India Singapore Hackathon. Talent exchange programs can be further thought of so that we can upskill professionals in data analytics, in AI, in sustainable technologies, and that can also lead to leveraging Singapore's global tech hub status. In the realm of defense cooperation, again, we already have a joint exercise in the form of SIMBEX, Singapore India Maritime Bilateral Exercise. We can maybe explore co-development of defense technologies. Again, these are arenas which are open. But just to give you an idea, these are some of the domains which we can think of.
Okay, so we also had like previously asked question and we got a lot of response from like when we opened the form previously. So there is a question here in context of Taiwan, and it's that how can Taiwan's experience of disaster preparedness, technological innovation, and epidemic response as seen during SARS and COVID-19 offer policy learning for India's vulnerable border region and help foster shared resilience with Southeast Asia? I will copy and pasting this in the comment box so it will be easy to read and answer.
Yeah, let me just take this question quickly. And I think Taiwan has been a wonderful partner to India when it comes to the COVID-19 response, and where it assisted in many ways, such as sharing of technology or giving us oxygen concentrators. That was mostly necessary at that during those times. But given Taiwan's itself knowledge sharing for its own experience of SARS-1, and at the second half, which was at SARS-2, that is something critical to India's medical infrastructure, and it has assisted and such. And you can see there are like a larger growing, larger investments in terms of semiconductors from the Taiwanese companies, with partnership with multiple different Indian companies such as Tata and other bigger semiconductor software companies as such. That has helped in the building of so-called Taiwan cities in the south of India, and also at the same time in Bangalore and in Gujarat and in also in Assam, where they have partnered with different companies in terms of building of semiconductors. At the same time, Taiwan and India also share something similar, such as the regular typhoon seasons that falls comes post summer in both Taiwan and India, which where both the sides have been trying to share knowledge again in disaster preparedness, in terms of medical facilities, or in terms of infrastructure built up in those coastal belts where which are more prone to such cyclonic or natural calamities. Thank you.
Yes,
So,
so thank
um,
you.
sorry to interrupt. I think we have that was a really wonderful sessions where we saw so many curious questions regarding diplomacy, what ASEAN countries can do, what India can do. Now we move forward. We would like everyone to turn on their camera. We request everyone to turn on their cameras, and we can take a group picture as a memory of this event. Everyone, they can please turn on your cameras. Uh, can one of the technical moderators take a pic of the entire event? Varang, Himani.
Drishti, I think Naman has taken these. So I'll just
Sure.
proceed with the vote of thanks.
Sure.
So thank you so much, Professor Dr. Panigrahi and Dr. Pathak, for your attendance here. And I won't take it long because I know much for your time. And I think if you wish to leave the call, you may, because I think you're running late. So we won't keep you waiting.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful being here and discussing with all of you, and all the best for the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
And I think have more engagement, and this should not be the last. Thank you.
Thank you. For the participants who are on this call, we request you to uh, a very short quiz. So I think Gaurangi, you can take it from here. So we'll be having a very short quiz, and we hope you really enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Himani to please share her screen so that people can scan the QR. Yeah, so you can see there's a QR. You just need to scan it with your phone and like make sure you read the rules before. And yeah, please start joining for the quiz. Anyone who wants to join using the link, it's on the chat. So you can access the link as well if the QR is not working for you.
Everyone, if you've not joined the quiz, please do, because we'll be starting it in 1 minute. So if you really want to get those certificates, we would request you to join quickly. For those unable to scan this, we have sent a link again on chat. So please, we'll be starting it in a minute. So please make sure you join in.
Okay, I hope everyone who wants to participate has already joined. I'll start the quiz now.
Himani, Jimmy, can you share the Google form also so he can fill it there? Guys, people who cannot scan the link or cannot open the form through the QR also, I have shared a link here. This is a Google form. So you can also take the quiz from there. And because we understand that some of you might face some technical discrepancies to make the results just, we will be giving one person who fills the QR, one person who fills the form also, the top person who results with the top result. That person will be given a certificate along with the two best participants for Slido, the quiz that we've shared, right, as a QR. So don't worry, even if you're taking it on form, it won't affect your result.
I think two people, Tan Jin Sun, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, and Obang, both of them have given the most amount of correct answers in the least amount of time. So, congratulations to you both. Thank you
Gaurav,
for
can we
participating.
also have a third person? Because Umang is from our teams, right? So we can have some
Yeah,
in the audience.
after Umang, it's Claire Allison. Claire Allison, she's done the quiz in 2 minutes and 20 seconds and all correct answers.
Okay, great work, guys. So we'll be sending you a certificate in a day or two. So thank you so much for your time here, and we hope you had a good fun with this quiz. Drishti, do you want to take over and conclude?
Sure. As we draw this insightful and enriching session to a close, it's my pleasure to deliver a vote of thanks on behalf of ASEAN Youth Organization India chapter in collaboration with Jindal School of International Affairs and Center for Northeast Asian Studies. First and foremost, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished panelists for sharing their expertise, time, and thoughtful perspective. Your insights have been strategic and economic and cultural dimensions of ASEAN's engagement with Northeast Asia and India have added immense value to our discussion. In the meanwhile, we also would like to share a feedback form with you all in case if you have any doubt or in case if you want to know more about our future collaborations or about this particular topic only. We are also deeply grateful to our partners and collaborators, the Jindal School of International Affairs and Center for Northeast Asian Studies for their support in making this event possible. Your academic leadership and commitment to international engagement truly enhanced the depth and credibility of this dialogue. A warm thank you goes to all our attendees, including students, scholars, policy enthusiasts, and young professionals from across the region. Your presence, engagement, and thoughtful questions made the session more interactive and meaningful. To all our volunteers and organizing team, thank you for your hard work behind the scenes. Your dedication ensured the smooth execution of today's event. Finally, we hope that today's discussion had not only deepened our understanding of ASEAN's role in shaping the Indo Pacific, but also sparked new ideas and collaborations for the future. As an organization led by youth for youth, AYO India remains committed to empowering the next generation to participate in global dialogue and regional development. We look forward to continuing these conversations in our future forums, research engagements, and cultural initiatives. Thank you once again to you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our upcoming events. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.